and guess, listen, they're making a ton of money off of other things too, such as Leagues Cup, which is our next topic here, because there is some thought that the Leagues Cup may no longer be around. And I have an interesting take on this, but I'll tell you what the um, owners thought, and I want to get your thoughts on this too, because there's a new format, right? Not taking this month break. It's going to be played kind of like the Open Cup, funny enough, where it's going to be mid-season, which we'll save those comments for another day. But the thoughts were, okay, what are we doing here? Like, is it going to stick around? Is it going to, what's going to happen, right? And people think that the new format's going to help, right? We're not taking this month off, but they don't think it's going to be around much longer. They think that it might be the last year of the Leagues Cup because not only is it works because of revenue, but they think Liga MX is going to walk away because they don't really need it as much as MLS does. And here's the thing. I liked Leagues Cup. I think it's unique, it's different, but not a lot of people do. Some people, some of the owners are saying they prefer Leagues Cup to Open Cup, which is a take, right? And I think that they both have positive and negatives to it, but a lot of people noticed, like, yeah, it got big because Messi's first game was in Leagues Cup, right? So,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on Leagues Cup? Does it stick around? And does this new format change anything?
So I do like that the format is changing because that taking the month off, that's weird. Like that was weird to me taking the month off. And I watched Leagues Cup the first go round. I thought it was great. I was a part of the crowd that kind of boycotted Leagues Cup last year. I will say that I was a part of that crowd because I like the US Open Cup. I like, and maybe that's because like the thought of like the FA Cup and stuff in Europe, like, these smaller teams beating these, bigger name teams. Like I loved it. I went to the Pittsburgh Riverhounds against Columbus Crew. I think it was like 2 years ago,
Nice.
and the Riverhounds upset them.
Yep.
And like it was electric. The fans were wild. It was sold out. Like, but yes, Columbus weren't playing all of their starters. We have that issue too, because I think really because at that point in time, Zelleron he didn't even travel with the team. Who else was their big player? Like a lot of them didn't travel. Like their
Mhm.
biggest name player that traveled was Aiden
Yep.
Morris.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but still like having those nights for those lower league teams, like playing, I like that. So I boycotted Leagues Cup, didn't even watch a game last year of it. But I think that my biggest thing too with Leagues Cup is I didn't like taking the whole month off. So I do kind of like that they're going to this, let's just do it midweek, kind of like how US Open Cup is.
Mhm.
The thing I hate the most about it though is that all the games are played on US soil.
Yep.
That is my biggest take. Like as a fan of soccer and of MLS. Like that is my biggest stake because it is not fair to Liga MX. And like, yes, I don't watch Liga MX. I'm not, I only watch them if they're in Champions Cup or Leagues Cup. That's the only time that I keep up with them. And like that's not fair in a sense to have all the games here in the US and like especially with us switching to this other format, like they can travel down, to Mexico
Mhm.
too. You gotta, it has to be both ways. And if I was Liga MX, I would pull out of it. If I don't, they're saying that Liga MX doesn't need it as much as, MLS does. If I were them, I'd pull out of it because we have to travel all the time where you guys don't have to travel, like you have to travel maybe a little bit, but not as much as we do. So I think that it could be a good thing, but I think it might die out if Liga. I can see Liga MX pulling out and then it's done. But I also am a bigger fan of U.S. Open Cup. But we can go back. It's a whole. We could go down a huge rabbit hole of U.S.
Oh
Open
yeah.
Cup. But just like we were talking about, like MLS has failed to market, the free games and stuff. Apple has failed to market. They do a terrible job with the US Open Cup.
Oh
Like I
yeah.
feel like the marketing for the US Open Cup is awful.
100%. And we don't need to, 'cause like you said, that's an hour long conversation. We've had that
Absolutely.
before. And I have no problem having that conversation again because while US Open Cup has its flaws,
Mhm.
A lot of them are self-inflicted, right? That's not a hot take, right? Like
Hmm.
we don't market it well. It doesn't have a TV deal. Most of the time, I mean, last year MLS took it on once we got into it, but the first two rounds are being shown on YouTube, which I don't mind, by the way. I think a lot of people watch YouTube anyway, so it's not a big stress.
But
But
yeah.
I like Leagues Cup, and one of the reasons I'm excited for 24. Um, at the end of 20 or what that I'm excited for 25 is because at the end of 24 we did an episode on how to make this better because it was very clear that the 1 month off sucked.
Yeah.
So how do we
Yeah.
make it better? One of the things we said was less teams, right? We don't need to see Juarez versus San Jose. Like I don't care,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what do? They cut it down to 18, top 9 from each conference. Love it, right?
Mhm.
Instantly we've got better quality and it's less games we have to worry about. Love it. Secondly, no month off. We're going back to midweek. Love it, right? I think that's great. A couple other things that we talked about too, just working in things that not as big changes, but wouldn't make as huge of a difference. Anyway, I like the new format. I like those whole things. But my big take was that when Leagues Cup came around, it was a 4-year tournament.
Mhm.
And I say that because if you remember all the way back to 2007, 2006, the North American Superliga. So North American Superliga was a 4-year tournament. Essentially, it lasted for 4 years, and it was MLS and League MX, and it was like the top six from each league, maybe top eight. I don't remember the exact numbers, but kind of as the thing only lasted 4 years for the exact kind of same reason we're having here, same issues. But from what I was reading about it, and take this with as much salt as you'd like, the biggest reason it was created was to put pressure on Champions Cup to say you need to improve your product, right? Because the people who were over Champions Cup didn't want to give control to MLS or US Soccer, but they also didn't want to put any money into it. So it was
Mhm.
like we were traveling to, and this is going to sound very echoey, but we were traveling to bad stadiums, playing in front of crowds that didn't, there weren't crowds there. The money wasn't in there.
Mhm.
So US Soccer was like, sort it out. So they said, we're going to pull most of our teams from it. We'll give you three or four for the Champions Cup, and then everything else is going to be in our tournament where we can make a lot of money, right? That lasted for 4 years until CONCACAF turned around and said, okay, we'll take over and do better. And then now here we are, what, 20 years later, all's well and dandy, right? Now let's fast forward to 2023. You've got US Open Cup playing in stadiums that Don Garber deems is not acceptable for his teams,
Yep.
not making enough money in front of crowds that are short. He makes this Liga MX tournament against MLS teams. He starts by putting as many as he can in there, and then he backs off a little bit and says, "Okay, we'll split it up. We'll give you some back to the tournament that I don't like, and I'll keep more for me." And then eventually it died out when somebody took over and made it better. Now, if you've been watching kind of the quality of US Open Cup, yeah, there was no TV deal, but I remember in 2023 watching a friend of I was friends with the coach at Flower City Union up in Rochester.
Mhm.
I had to watch their game on a stream from the website. I believe it was 11. I think the website was called 11. And when I tell you that I have a split screen right now where I've got notes on this side and you're on this side, right?
Mhm.
As we panned from here to here, there was just a hole in the middle of the screen. And then it
Yep.
came back to the action. So you couldn't actually see what was happening at midfield. It's like that was 2 years ago,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
again, and we talk about it being self-inflicted, right? US Soccer and MLS, who I don't know if they had divested at that point. I can't remember what exact year that was, but you could have put more effort into it by giving them a better camera setup, getting yourselves a
Yeah.
streaming deal, but we didn't, right? Now Don Garber pulls out and says, okay, you deal with it. They go and make it better, and then he comes back in. This isn't something that has not been historically forgotten.
Mhm.
Don Garber knows what he's doing, but I think there are so many new fans to this league, and the people who are complaining about it don't remember that. And I and I,
Yeah.
I say that as somebody who was not around for it either. I just read up on it because I was doing some stuff for our MLS history segment, and the North American Superliga was a part of it, and that's when I picked this up. So
Okay.
I did a little. I wasn't there for it, but I did do I did a little bit of research, and it popped up to me. But I don't think many people know this. So
I did not know anything
yeah.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and neither did I. I thought it was just another like, oh, it's a North American Super League. It was originally the Champions Cup, and then it changed names.
Mhm.
No, it was put in place so that Don Garber could encourage somebody to do better and make himself some money. So
Now, I will say I'm I can't wait to see what the attendance is like for Leagues Cup with
Hmm.
it being midweek games,
Correct.
because I feel like there's a huge issue with attendance for midweek games in America and like American
100%.
games and stuff, because I feel like even these Champions Cups this year, I've really watched the Champions Cup, and
100. Oh, I haven't seen a single one.
you haven't, yeah. So
No.
I've been paying attention to it. Watched Herediano upset Real Salt Lake, and then they played against the Galaxy. I watched those. I've watched a couple of different games, and if you look, man, the attendance is awful
It's
all the way
brutal.
around.
Oh,
It's
it's
brutal.
terrible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I like the new format of Leagues Cup also, but what is the attendance going to be like there in the midweek? That's one
100%.
thing.
Yeah, and that's a completely fair conversation.
Mhm.
I see a lot of anti-MLS people who will use all these stats to try and prove MLS is bad, and a lot of the stats are garbage. And I say
Mhm.
that as a master's educated engineer. Like I know numbers. Like that's kind of my thing.
Yeah.
A lot of the stats are bad, but that's a very fair one, right? To be able to say, oh yeah, you're comparing U.S. Open Cup attendance, which only plays Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday until the quarterfinals,
Mhm.
to, or actually no, it was until the semifinals, I think, to a tournament that plays 3 weeks straight in the middle of summer when nobody's in school, nobody's, everybody can take time off, and half of their games are on the weekend.
Yeah.
It's a fair gripe, right?
Mhm.
And that is a really really interesting one to think. And I think that's what's going to push it over. If Don Garber sees like okay, nobody's showing up in midweek, it's gone, right? But
Yeah.
if he sees okay, there's enough people here, we're like, we're going to be able to push this out another 2 years. He'll push it out another 2 years. He'll
Oh
push
yeah.
it out until the end of his tenure, and then he'll say, okay, let's move on because it's I'm done. The new commissioner will come in and be like, okay, we're done with this, right? Get himself a win with the non MLS crowd and move on. So.
Yeah.
Um, so that it's super interesting. I can't wait to see that.